People are using AI to write posts. And if you think about what that's like today, think about what that looks like in 5 years. How are you going to know that something is true? Social media, generally speaking, no, but you will know it's true if it came from someone or a brand that you believe is telling the truth. So the truth economy, if I'm, a CEO or I'm a boss and I'm looking down at my publication QSR and I'm saying, well, okay, Danny's not valuable to me because he writes 10 things a week, which is what they probably would have said 10 years ago. Danny's valuable to me because people believe what he says.
Today's guest is Danny Klein. Look, at my former life as a restaurant operator, Danny and his publication served as my looking glass to the world outside of the four walls of my business. He oversees QSR Magazine, FSR Magazine, and a portfolio of some of the most influential publications in food, hospitality, and retail. He's not just reporting on the industry, he's defining it for so many like myself. In this conversation, we explore the evolution of journalism, from sports reporting to trade media, from print to AI, what it means to tell stories in an era where everyone has a microphone, but very few have earned trust. We talk about AI's complicated relationship with the truth, how Danny is building a first-of-its-kind editorial search engine rooted in credibility, and why some of the most powerful restaurant stories have nothing to do with food at all, and everything to do with people. This is a conversation about journalism, technology, and the business behind the business of restaurants, with somebody who's not just covering the story, but actively shaping how it sees itself. But before we dive in, a special thanks to our sponsor, ClearCOGS. ClearCOGS is a leading provider of demand forecasting software for the restaurant industry, because the path to greater profits is always clearer when you know the road ahead. And if you're liking this conversation, please hit that like and subscribe button. With that, I give you my conversation with Danny Klein. I appreciate having you on, man.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right, so I always kind of wonder about journalists in restaurants. How do you find yourself here? I mean, were you a restaurant guy that started doing journalism, or were you a journalist that found your way into restaurants?
Yeah, definitely the second. I was definitely not a restaurant person, other than, what most of us are at some point of our lives, which is that we eat at restaurants and think that means we know something. But no, I was a sports writer. It was what I went to college to do. That was what my father envisioned for me in life. So I went chasing that dream in his honor. He had kind of always grown up, and he would read me the newspaper, the Daily News in New York, and he was a big Mike Lupica fan. And so I kind of was always a little bit of a writer. That was just sort of my creative experience as a teenager. And so he thought I should be a sports writer. So I went to the University of Florida. They actually didn't have a sports writing track at that time, but, I was able to work at the school newspaper. I covered basketball as a senior, which was cool. And yeah, this just came about because I was about 8 or 9 years into my professional sports writing career, and our company, our newspaper in Daytona Beach, got sold to this large evil conglomerate that we were all very familiar with in terms of Southeast newspaper guttings. It was Gatehouse. I'm sure they're still probably awful, but yeah, I got told I had a month until I was being laid off, along with my entire department. It was just an outsourcing to Texas kind of moment. And in that month, my wife was sending me jobs from everywhere she could possibly find them, mostly in North Carolina, because she had camped here and she was she wanted to move to North Carolina, get out of Florida and all these things. And next thing I know, I'm applying to a job at something called Food News Media in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They call me back the next day. I come up to the interview, and, this editor of FSR Magazine at the time, she's kind of taking me around Chapel Hill and talking to me about giving me all these magazines. And my kind of initial thought was that it seemed like a great company, really small, about 20, 25 people or so. It was run by the same guy who had founded it at the time. He was there. I interviewed with him, told me he liked my suit. Our publisher, who is now our SVP of audience, he told me that when he was interviewing me, that he had never met a sports writer that he actually liked. And I told him that was true. Either had I.
Well, let me say this. My wife went to FSU, and I think as much as she roots for the Seminoles, she roots against the Gators more than she's rooting for the Seminoles.
Yeah, and that's fine. The most fun I ever had in college, I just have to admit this, was a weekend I spent at Florida State.
Yeah.
Because the thing was, I had grown up in New York. I thought the University of Florida was going to be on a beach. This is what my guidance counselor told me. And this was back when you had to go into the library to get on the internet, so I just took her for her word, and I didn't know it was in the middle of nowhere until I got there. And it was a very smart school. I didn't realize that either. I didn't realize how good of a public university it was, how smart the kids were. I was in the engineering dorm for some reason. And
yeah, you clearly didn't Google their football stadium to see it was called the Swamp. I think that would have been a dead giveaway.
I don't even know if Google was really around then. Not to sound like I'm super old or something, but I don't remember even having that ability. I just remember her telling me, "Hey, this is on Clearwater Beach," and I was like, "Cool, that sounds awesome. I'll go do this." I'd got into Penn State, Indiana, and Florida basically, and it's like state schools, and I just thought to myself, well, I'm going to go to Clearwater Beach. If I have the option to go to Happy Valley, Pennsylvania, or, I forget
Bloomington.
where. Yeah, Bloomington.
I was going to say,
right, yeah.
Happy Valley sounds like a happy place. Why wouldn't I want to go to there or the beach? Bloomington, not so much.
Well, Happy Valley literally feels like it's in the middle of nowhere. I went to visit that in Bloomington. And for some silly reason, the only place I didn't visit was the school I went to.
Well, first off, Happy Valley is in the middle of nowhere.
Right, yeah. I got up there and I'm like, why would I come here? Not, all the love of Penn State is a huge school and people love it, but it just looked like it was going to be the coldest place on earth. And again, my other option was Clearwater Beach in my brain. So I just dropped down into Gainesville. I remember flying over it and thinking to myself, this just looks like a giant forest. And it is kind of also in the middle of nowhere. And it's basically the University of Florida is Gainesville and the Alachua County and all that stuff. But
well, I imagine that the benefits of covering sports are pretty clear. You get to watch a lot of sports, attend a lot of sports. What's the benefits of being a food writer? Because these have to be the two most sought after journalist positions. Maybe wine tasting.
Yeah. So, that's obviously, when I talk about Indiana, Penn State, and Florida, that's why I picked giant sports schools so I could go cover sports at them and become a sports writer. But
you could have timed out Penn State really good.
Well, I timed out Florida really good because I was at Florida during 3 national titles, 2 basketball and 1 football. Right.
We don't talk about that enough.
But anyway, so what you just said is actually the funny part of sort of when this began and when I went through that experience and decided, to work here. That's what everybody thought I was coming to do, is be a food writer. That's what my colleagues were saying, and this, again, I wasn't working at QSR for the first year and a half. So they thought I was going to go write about 5-star independent restaurants, all this cool stuff. But we're not food writers. I recognized that the minute I got here. We're writing about the business of running restaurants, which is quite different because I'm not eating at these places mostly. It's not like I'm getting, wined and dined and then come back and tell you how I thought it tastes. I've never once in a single article that I've written in the 10 years that I've worked here since have ever commented on what I think something tastes like.
We'll dig into that. If the business of restaurants isn't, it is food, right? But the business behind it is very different. Where's the distinction?
Well, everyone thought I was going to become a critic. I was leaving sports writing to go, give 5-star reviews. They didn't really think oh, you're going to go serve a B2B audience and write for a magazine that serves other restaurant owners. And actually, when I got here, and I didn't really know that either. I didn't know what I was getting into. I was just trying to get out of where I was.
You had to explain to your wife where the next paycheck was coming from.
Well, they ended up not laying me off. So the process took long enough where they rehired me for someone else they laid off. But by then I had this offer and I was thinking to myself, well, I probably shouldn't stay at this company that nearly let go of me for nothing. Like I didn't do anything to be fired. So this doesn't seem like a good 5-year plan. Right? So
Not sure this is the river I want to swim in.
no. And then the other thing too is that sports writing, yes, it's kind of going back to my publisher's comment about not being anybody that he ever met that he liked. They're kind of, and this is one of the beauties of it, but they're like grown-up kids, right? Because you're doing what you wish you could have done, and you're staying into that universe, and it's great. You're going to cover football games and basketball games, but your hours are horrible. Generally speaking, the pay is not so good either. But I never saw my wife. I didn't have kids yet, so I remember thinking, like, if I want to start a family, I don't really know how I'm going to do it. I worked with this guy. He would get up at like 4 a.m. just so he could walk his kids to the bus, because we don't come back until we work like 4 to midnight usually, because obviously that's when sports happen. So I would go out and I'd be covering football games. I'd be coming at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We had reverse schedules, my wife and I. And so I kept thinking, like, if I have a kid, like, what am I going to do? So journalism in this food space, we have normal hours. We work 9 to 5, so it's because it's not that type of thing where, we're reporting on some kind of like live action event.
Also, note to self, if you're going to be a sports writer, live in Hawaii, and all of a sudden you fix all your hours issues.
Yeah, West Coast would be that would be a different vibe for sure. But I did it. I worked Sundays, for 10 years. I always worked on Christmas Day. So there were a lot of things that just were not, like, you were giving up a lot of your personal life to go do something for a living that on paper a lot of people want to do, and sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. And sometimes it was, but yeah, this gave me a chance to have kids, which I ended up doing, and to see my wife and to do all this kind of more stable stuff. And so that was when I was sitting there balancing this out. I thought, well, I don't know anything about this, but I'm going to go do it because the benefits are pretty obvious.
We'll go back in and dig into the business behind the food. What is the business behind the food?
Right. So I get to work that first day, and my editor hands me like a stack of magazines of FSR over the years, and I go home and I'm reading them. I took about, I don't know, like 2 months to read every issue or something like that. And I would go to read these and they would terrify me because that's a daunting concept. It's like, I didn't understand what the business of food meant. I didn't know anything about running a restaurant. So I got handed this. So that's why I just tried to consume everything I could. And this is something I still do today in the world of AI is whenever I interview somebody, pretty much everybody I know, and I don't fault them for this, but they'll use our in-house transcription to transcribe the interview because they're smart. I still don't do that. I transcribe every single interview that I do. And the reason I do that is because I want to listen back to the person speaking when I'm not worried about what I'm asking them next. And I can just start to regurgitate the way that they talk because I was very self-aware of not understanding like what I was talking about, unlike sports where it was like part of my life from 3-4 years old, and I could write about football and basketball because I understood them. But this, I had to keep consuming information, and I still do this now. 10 years later, I will take 5 hours to transcribe a long interview if I need to, because I just have to listen to it almost like a webinar or a podcast.
In the world of journalism, does being naive actually provide a different perspective versus being an expert?
I think so. I'm a big fan of that in the way I hire too. But I hired this guy who came from the restaurant industry. He had helped open some like mellow mushrooms or something and had worked in the space and also had a master's in journalism. We're like, cool, that's different. And he was horrible in many, many ways. But one of those, I think, was that point, because sometimes I think when I interview people, I've seen this in like fireside chats and conferences and things, is like there is a benefit of not having all the answers when you interview somebody. because if they say something to me like, oh yeah, I did this AI technology inventory or whatever, and I've never run inventory in my life, I might then be in that position to say, okay, well, tell me how it works. Because if I don't have all the answers and then I can't pretend that I do when I go to write something, I do think that it kind of forces you as a journalist to spend more time trying to understand what somebody says. So like when I go back and I transcribe, like you said, like I was talking about, I'll kind of stop and be like, okay, well, like I have no idea what this acronym he just threw at me is, right? And if I did know already, I might not have tried to dive deeper. So I don't think it's ever bad. And then I think the other part of it too is that sometimes I will ask people questions, executives of KFC and whatever, like I'll ask them questions that don't really have anything to do with restaurants, right? And sometimes we get down into the storytelling side of B2B. And when I first got here, my editor was trying to kill that out of me. But I didn't listen to her. All the love to her, but I didn't listen. And I think in the end, that's one of the reasons why QSR and FSR are what they are now, is that we still get to the people part of this business. We don't try to be boring on purpose. And
well, in fairness, you're covering hospitality and you're covering, your listenership, your readership is restaurants, restaurant technology. These are people businesses, right? They care about the people. I want to get to the business behind, the business of restaurants. But before we do, go back to what you were saying about the AI transcripts and, you actually going through them, manually versus just using an AI to summarize. What is AI doing to journalism?
Well, it's kind of fascinating timing. So we're very much in the heart right now of answering this question or trying to answer it. We're actually going to present on it soon to like larger higher ups within our company. So we built this tool. I don't know if you saw this. I posted about it on LinkedIn recently. We built an internal AI search tool. And I haven't seen this anywhere else, but basically what we did is we replaced the search bar on our website with what basically is ChatGPT, but that we built. And so the idea being that we're looking at the future, and someone had said this to me a couple of weeks ago, of the I'm telling the truth economy. So basically how it works is if you go into the website and you go into we called it Ask QSR Anything, powered by Real Restaurant Insights.
We need to come up with a way better marketing title.
It's just piloting. And you sometimes
it's a working
see it.
Title.
Yeah, you sometimes see it and sometimes you don't. And we're recording all the answers on the back end to see how well it does and also the type of things people are asking. But the important part of it is that if you go to it and you say, who is the CEO of Starbucks? The way that it populates the answer to that question, unlike OpenAI, is just through our website. So it only uses QSR Magazine research, reporting, articles to answer questions. And then it gives you preferred sources and source matter to follow up and to read articles that, again, are all coming only from our site. So what we're trying to do in preparation for this future is say, hey, here's a trustworthy source. We've been around since 1997. There is some sense of like asking questions on Google that it's coming from who knows where. It's not always accurate. It is a good tool to be helpful, but we want to house that inside what we believe is our core equity, which is our trust. And so we're building this right now and kind of looking to the future, but there's a lot of other things happening too. That's just something recent that I've thought has been very...
That's fascinating though. So I get why you would do that today. How do I provide a better user experience to our customers? They need an answer. They know it's a trusted source. We're going to give them the right information. I think you called it the truth-telling economy. I want to hear more about that. But I don't necessarily see the future. Is this something that if you have, those answers and you've been answering those truthfully, a OpenAI is going to somehow utilize that system?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think the idea is kind of competing with OpenAI now as a search engine, because people, if you go to Google now and you type in who is the CEO of Starbucks, it gives you that thing now at the top, right, where you don't even have to go to QSR Magazine and read the article. So search traffic and SEO and the things that were very important when I got here, 10 years ago, not really how we look at content distribution anymore. So it really is meant not so much for just kind of random people as it is meant for continuing the journey for someone who's already at our site looking for information. And then that funnel becomes ever more important in how we're controlling it, which has been something else that we've been working very, very focused on for the past, I would say, year and a half, which is segmenting the audience. So, when back in the day it was, and a lot of people still do this, that's just how it is, but like, get the biggest email list you can, blast it out, keep blasting it out until you get the page views or the whatever it is that you're trying to achieve on the metrics. But we don't want to do that anymore. I just don't see the value in it in the future. So
I'm not sure that works anymore.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work anymore, right?
Yeah.
So
content overload. You need to tell me something that's of value to me that I want to hear about from a trusted source for me to want to go read.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been working on the audience while we're doing this. So we've been pruning. We've been doing something that no one does, which is removing huge swaths of our email audience. And we try hitting them over and over again. And if they don't respond, we've been getting rid of them, or we're looking to kind of prune that. And then also figure out, we got more sophisticated on, the questions that go into, when you do sign up and understanding who you are, and then the type of products that we want to reach. So this AI tool on the website, so like I went in there and I used this example of Starbucks CEO, and I typed in, who's the CEO of Starbucks? It started to cite me personally. Not like, hey,
Danny, you said this.
Right, it didn't say
Don't disagree with me. I know who you are.
Right. Like, it didn't say, like, according to Danny Klein. It's just like every word that started to pop up on that screen, I had written. Like, I knew I wrote it, and it was giving all these articles of things that I wrote. So you have kind of this multi-tiered process of like, here's the information, here's the source. And then me, myself, as an editor, we're looking to the future of what an editor is, right? Because it used to be like, hey, you get the like editor in chief, and then you get this rotating, 22-year-old that like come and churns out content and moves on to their next position in a year or two. And if maybe they're great, like you find a way for them to move up. But to me, there's no future for that, because they're not doing anything that AI is not going to be able to do, or even kind of can't do now. So like, I have a team member now, you probably have come across her, Satine, who's sort of, she entry level, came off of being an intern. But to me, she's the future of the editor in the AI universe, because rather than chasing page views or volume of content, really what she does in all her processes, she's just casting the net wider and wider and wider, and becoming this trustworthy source on the LinkedIn and in other places, that this community of leaders, they come to her. She does this Wednesday wine down with women in leadership in the industry, where they drink wine and like talk. She has a board of directors that she meets with and gets all their thoughts. She's constantly commenting on their posts. They have conversations about real things. We do webinars, we do virtual happy hours. We do all these little pieces of content that end up leading to somewhere. But again, it's not about how many articles she writes or even page views. It's about this community building, user connected universe that she's developing. And that to me is kind of the future of who's going to be successful.
Well, what you kind of just said, and correct me if I'm wrong, is I used to publish content through a magazine or organization, a distribution channel. That distribution channel has in some ways shifted to social media. And now all of a sudden the brand is the individual, and the audience they reach is their community. Where's that leave brands, publishing companies?
Well, the brand to me is part of that also, because the brand has to gain that trust the same way that a person would. And the way I look at that now is mostly still through email. And, I think personal brands are better on social media for sure. Every metric that you could track there in the world will show that. However, emails are still really important to us. And I view an email program not as a content distribution model necessarily at its base, but more as kind of like a rewards program similar to a restaurant. So the idea being that this is like the VIP experience, and I want
curated content,
and as much about entertaining and informing somebody as it is about selling them an aspirational vision of the other people reading this e-letter. So I want people to understand that I used to say this in the terms of like, I wanted to create the Economist of the restaurant trade publication world. So I want people to read this because they're obsessed with this industry, not because they need to know who went bankrupt. That's part of it. But the bigger part of it is the community view of like, who else is reading this e-letter? And so the way to achieve that was the segmentation is important, but the other part was this was like 6 or 7 years ago. I had this question of like, how, we're all going to write kind of similar things, Pizza Hut earnings call, we're all going to cover the same thing. But is there a way that I could cover it so that they'll go to read it and be like, oh yeah, like that's the QSR version of this? And so the answer to that was not easy because it was very in-depth and long. And basically, I call it my brother model, where if he reads it and says, I don't want to read this, it's boring, then I feel like I was successful. So how do you keep doing that? And it starts to like cascade into a lot of different other products, but it's really not meant for anybody that you wouldn't want to be. And,
it goes back to your community thing, right? It used to just be, I publish an article. Was that content relevant to the individual reading the article? Now I post about it on LinkedIn with the article, and there's community engaging and giving their thoughts, and other CEOs rebuting certain facts, and, other people making the case for, other areas. It feels very different. It's a conversation, not a statement.
Well, I think I saw your post. Was it you who posted the other day about the recent LinkedIn algorithm?
Yeah, this is very relevant, right? I'm going to go put this podcast up on LinkedIn in a short form video, and LinkedIn does not like it. Even if it is business-related content that's really good, for whatever reason, they do not like, these podcast clips.
I have some opinions on this subject. So about 2 weeks ago, I was sitting there and I was like, I suddenly had a badge. I suddenly had a premium account, which I didn't pay for. And I also suddenly was a top voice. And I was like,
what's it feel like to be a top voice?
Well, yeah, I was like, that's cool. I didn't apply for this. I don't know where it came from. And it came with the premium account. So I was like, that's cool. But what I noticed was about that same time was when everything changed on the algorithm. So suddenly, like, I was getting maybe a third the amount of engagement, even as a top voice. I can't seem to post graphics. I can't post a lot of links to stories. So that's why you see a lot of people now when they post a photo and they say read
in
more.
The comments.
Yeah, and all this kind of, and then the main thing, as I saw in your posts, and totally true, is like my entire feed is 3 weeks old. And so I have a theory for this. I think, and again, the one thing about LinkedIn that's a constant though, and that's why I don't really get too worked up about this, is it's going to change again. They just constantly change, and it's not anything you got to try to like figure out forever. But I mean, who knows in this case? But I think what they're trying to do is copy Instagram. This is my take.
Yeah, and I'm not sure you're not wrong on that. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I'll say this, if the new economy is my distribution channel is LinkedIn, right? And I'm a journalist, and that's where I've built my community. And then all of a sudden that community is being leveraged against me in any way. I got some issues, right? Like you're in a predicament.
No, it is, but I'm not panicking because I think it'll change. But the one thing about LinkedIn that I think remains probably the most valuable side of it is the Rolodex element of it. So as long as I could still message people, it's fine. Do I like the depressed engagement? No, I don't think it's here to stay personally. So I'm just going to keep posting until it picks up. That's just kind of how I've done it in the past, because it's not the first time. But what I think they're trying to do is just basically they want to house their creators within their space to not send you elsewhere, and then to also really kind of promote less of news sharing and what's happening and more of like thoughts and leadership. And they're doing it like to a over exaggerated degree at the moment, in my opinion. And then I think it'll scale back, but they're just penalizing you for anything that's current. I had this conversation last week with someone where he was like, we sent a breaking alert on our email system about McDonald's, and my publisher was like, did you have to do that, or like couldn't you have just gone to LinkedIn and be like breaking news? And I was like, no, I can't anymore. Because if I went in, and I did that also, but like people aren't going to see it for like 3 weeks. So this is how my timeline works now. It's like I'll post something, it takes like 5 hours to get going, and then it starts to go, and I get like little trickles every day or so. But yeah, I can't like use it as it's like Twitter did that too for a while. Then they kind of changed. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it right now is my take, but we'll see what happens.
Well, I give them credit. They are always innovating. They're always changing. They're always seeking improvement. And, if you take that trajectory, you're going to end up with a better product, even if there's some bumps along the way.
Yeah, I think they're on a bump right now, but they do listen. I know some of their news editors, or have had conversations with them at times, and
hashtag top voice.
Well, this was before that. But you know what they haven't done since they changed the algorithm too is they were making these like news stories, and then they would be like, they'd take your comment and they'd throw it into the news story. So, and then you would see something, you'd see it pop on your feed, and you'd be like, Danny was added to the, McDonald's releasing, the chicken Big Mac. And then, they haven't done that lately. And instead they're kind of doing it like quietly.
But I think that goes back to what you guys were doing with, your actual like online searchable AI. How do I, the truth telling economy? How am I a source of truth? And I sit here and think about AI and think it's a great translation layer, right? It's great if you give it a fact, right, and information of writing a narrative around that. So if the AI is good at writing the narrative, right, and the facts are kind of the facts, where does the original person who wrote the article fit in? Are they just a person that's putting their name on some facts that are going to be regurgitated in another way? Are they the one influencing how that story gets told? How does that actually, what's the future of that look like?
Yeah, I was just doing a presentation. I was putting together this topic this morning. So you have good timing in some of these questions, but my kind of point on that was the person using the AI matters right now, if we're talking journalists, not just in knowing kind of how to ask it questions and what facts to give it, but also in how you distribute it, right? There's a different level to that. Like I can be, a publication, and I could use AI and I could write this article and I could do this, but if I don't have any network, then what good was any of that? So you're kind of investing in that community, as I mentioned. But I just think that there's something to be said now in the future of making sure that you're not doing what the industry long did in journalism, which is just taking facts and telling you what happened. We're kind of moving away from that to a degree. Like if you look at ESPN, going back to my sports writing life, not that I worked at ESPN, but if you go to cover a game, like, the Knicks are playing the Celtics, the game story that's written afterwards, that we used to sit there on the floor and we'd have to write it at the gun, and you're writing it as the game is going on. That's just not really a thing as much now because AI does that for ESPN. So what they seem to be investing in is like either the analytical dive afterwards, or, kind of the access to something that you can't get from just facts. So like in our case, I've done a lot of these stories in the last couple of weeks of, when I went to the Chicago show this year, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with myself content wise. So I was like, well, I'm just going to interview like 9, which ended up being 9 executives. And then I'm just going to do this like series on their thoughts, and I'm just going to give you their thoughts. You're just Q&As from 9 different people, link them all together, ask them the same 3 questions. And the idea behind that was that's, in my opinion, something that AI can't really do. We're going to sell audience, access, and peer-to-peer development. So those are the 3 things. And then distribution through an editor, who has gained the trust in community is how I think you kind of get around some of these things. And that's my take on it right now is I am going to use my brand, QSR, as a platform and the things that we do in the magazine and online. And I'm going to talk to the CEO of Chipotle for an hour. I'm going to tell you what he said. You can't get that anywhere else.
What's the truth-telling economy?
Right. Well, so this is what this guy was telling me. And that basically, if you look at the internet now, especially social media, even LinkedIn, right? Keep seeing people complain about this. As we're using AI, I don't do this personally, but like people are using AI to write posts, and especially X. I mean, X is just full of bots and AI and information. And back in the verified model days, like who knows what's true on Twitter right now or X, whatever. But like that if you think about what that's like today, think about what that looks like in 5 years, right? Like, all right, I went on Google the other day and I typed into that like whole AI search thing and I said, is Danny Klein a good person to follow for restaurant news? And it told me that it said, yes, Danny Klein is a good person to follow for restaurant news. He's the editor of Restaurant Business. And I was like, no, he's not. So that's just today. 5 years from now, again, this was just the conversation we were having, is like, how are you going to know that something is true? Social media, generally speaking, no. But you will know it's true if it came from someone or a brand that you believe is telling the truth. So again, that goes like why we're creating that in-house tool. It's like, you should believe QSR is telling you the truth, I hope. You should believe I'm telling you the truth. So the truth economy, if I'm, a CEO or I'm a boss and I'm looking down at my publication QSR and I'm saying, well, okay, Danny's not valuable to me because he writes 10 things a week, which is what they probably would have said 10 years ago. Danny's valuable to me because people believe what he says. And that's the truth economy. And I think that's the investments that a lot of media companies are going to have to start making, is in the people side and in the like networking side. And then those are the people using AI. And that's a different story than like you outsourcing your AI to another country or things like that. So
I imagine,
I think that's what I'm trying to say here.
You've got a wife, you've got kids. I imagine the kids are in bed. Your wife asks, AI seems to be changing everything. Like, are you going to have a job in the future? What gives you, what's the answer? What gives you comfort about your role in this world as it evolves?
Yeah, I think I have made investments to see that through. I worry about some people who are younger and come into the world and they're working remote in journalism and all we're doing is measuring them by like the type of things that they're creating. That's really, really difficult. And I fear for them. And I try to make sure this doesn't happen to people I hire. But there are people in my universe for sure I see fit this bill where they're basically invisible bylines, right? And they think that the quality of the article that they write and the amount is going to save them. And I don't think that it will eventually, because the people that you're going to need to keep are the people who are irreplaceable, are going to be the ones who are tied, to that truth and trust. And it goes like, if you look at us as a company, we didn't get into the in-person space until 3 years ago. And I'm not saying that we were trying to get ahead of AI, but if you look to the future of how that works and kind of how you market and you get speakers and you get people to attend these events, this is now a game that's being played based on the back of the network of your people. So for me, I sit there again, if my wife was asking me these questions, which thankfully she's not, I put in the time in my life right now, as difficult as it is, to do things like be a conference planner in addition to a journalist, and to spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and become a top voice and to have 45,000 followers, even though I'm definitely not an extroverted person. Anyone who's been to our conferences will tell you that. But I understood years ago that I had to become something more than what I was putting down on paper. And even then, like, I have kind of evolved to making sure that the type of journalism that I do now is not streamlined. You know, it's I write a certain way. I kind of don't follow certain rules, and I also don't really hold my type of journalism. Like, I'm not trying to teach it to other people. Like, it's just what I want to do. I write really long stuff. Well, yeah, you got to be authentic. It's not easy. I mean, we've had a lot of discussions at times where someone will be like, oh, you know, Danny gets a lot of engagement. He's got a lot of followers. Like, here's what he's doing. Why don't you tell everybody? And, you know, and I'm like, and I remember telling one of our employees this one time, and I'm like, look, you can't try to like copy. Like, if you don't want to tell people about your dog or your wife or your kids, you don't want to be personal, and that's like not your voice, people are going to realize this. And don't try to do that because like I do it. You know, you have to figure out who you are. So to like insulating my future, I mean, that's the best way that I've been able to try to do that, is to become, you know, I just try to overwork myself to be irreplaceable. You know,
I think it's a combination of things. You basically said it's about building a network and relationships that are real, because that provides, you know, future access, interesting tidbits, right? Like, it gives you more content. And then, you know, on the other side of that, it's there's a lot of uncertainty around AI. So it's not a bad time to have a broad swath that you're playing in. If one of the verticals gets erased, you at least have other places to play.
Yeah, true. That's accurate. But you know, hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, that's the future. We don't quite know where things go, but you have to also position yourself when you're building your digital network. I often, like, I help people, if, you know, under the right circumstance, you know, try to find jobs if they get in that situation. I'll send them like openings I see. I'll be like, hey, I saw, you know, I knew this person. She was awesome. Maybe you should consider her. You try to use like my connections and friendships over the years to do that kind of favor for people. And I'm not saying like I want to cash that in someday, but I do see that there's a greater vision here than trying to know that, like, here's the thing about a lot of CEOs and people who run publishing companies, and it can be frustrating for editors. You go to write like a really great article and you think like, this is amazing, they're going to notice. It's not how it works.
Before we shift into restaurants, I have a question about just the future of writing. So I had an interesting conversation with someone in my neighborhood who's like a global best-selling author and is a professor of literature or writing for a university. And I had this fascinating conversation with him where I asked, do you prefer something that's well written or an interesting idea? And he basically said, I can't get past poor writing. Like, I prefer great writing over the idea. I was incredibly dyslexic. I went into high school with a 3rd grade reading level. Like, reading and writing is not my forte. But like most dyslexic people, you know, we have weird, interesting ideas. And so I looked at, you know, large language models and AI and thought, oh my gosh, you mean to tell me that I can mash these interesting ideas together and someone can handle the articulation of them with the grammar and all of that? You know, if you are a young graduate or you're coming out of high school, you know, is the future the ideas because the writing takes care of itself? Should you be learning to write yourself? Like, walk me through your thoughts on that.
That is a very, very interesting question. You're the person that you're mentioning, that is a select group of human beings in the world where words,
they're professors.
Words like matter to us very deeply. I remember I had a creative writing professor tell me that I was she said something like, I could tell you're one of the people that words matter. And it was because I was kind of quiet. I was an observer more than a engager in life. And so, yeah.
Send her a clip to the podcast. You're like, I'm gauging in life right now.
Yeah. Well, I was like that guy. Well, it's a whole long story for why I think this is, but the moral being like, I care about the quality of writing. I will often read books that I think are well written before I'm like, I don't even know what the hell this is, but I will appreciate the writing. But to your point, when I was going to interview more and more younger people, I was finding that to be almost non-existent. And my wife's an English teacher, by the way, so we talk about this sometimes. And social media and again AI and the way the internet works now, people consume words differently. And I'm not personally like fully in this TLRD world, but TLDR world of like no one has any attention span. I don't quite buy that, but what I do buy is that a lot of younger people consume snippets of information very quickly, like you scroll on a feed, right? And so when I was going to interview them, they were writing articles for me and stuff and none of them were really good at writing. I was like, have you just like you graduated from a really good college journalism school? And like, I can't believe how bad you are at writing. Like this would never have happened when I was in college, or you would have switched majors and been like, I got to get out of here. So I think there are going to be tiers of this conversation that you're mentioning. There will always be an audience for what you're saying. And if you're that person, I do think we still need to teach ourselves how to write, because you're not going to write the great American novel through AI. But if you're just someone who's trying to like distribute information, it's going to become less important. What I think you're going to see is you're going to see people in college who say they want to be something that's not a writer. They don't want to write at all. They're probably going to use AI, and we're not going to stop them. I was just at Auburn University recently, their hospitality school, and the dean told me that they don't police it anymore because they actually view it as a skill. And so like if people are using AI to write their term papers, they're like, well, like there's no scale that we were able to like stop this. So we just kind of figured out a way to like let it come in. And so I don't think there's one answer to what you're saying. I think there will be people who like Ben on my team, who's great. He's just amazing. He's not a reader and he writes pretty well. He uses AI very, very well. Like he's skilled at using AI. He's skilled at using AI in a way that I am not. And so I just think there's a lot of different parts to this conversation that are not yet decided. And so I just don't think there's an answer.
Well, let me steel man the other case. When you look at AI, it's really good at writing long form. The more complex, detailed, longer, the better it does. What it struggles with, writing something at a third grade level, fewer words. And I sit there and think of quotes like, I would have used fewer words, but I didn't have the time. And like, there's something poetic about that. There's a quote, I forget who it's by, but they say you die twice, once when they bury you in the grave, and the second time is the last time somebody mentions your name. It's like, wow, that's poetic. AI is not going to write that, or at least not today. But man, it could write a book on it for whatever it's worth.
No, you're right. I think that's true. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer to that question. I'm not a big user of it. One of the things it does really well for journalists is you can tell it to proofread your article. I still don't do that. And the reason I don't do that is because proofreading to me is less about the grammar and more about me fixing some of the rambling things that were in my head when I put it down on paper. It doesn't really do a great job of that unless you tell it specifically like, hey, make this more concise. But I want to be able to go back and be like, what was I talking about here? Like, why did I even say this? And that's just, and again, that's just me. I'm probably, we all have our own processes, writers. The one thing about editors you can always take to the bank is they are a fickle breed of human beings. I mean, if you think about what kind of career you would want to have where you're putting your name on your work, it tends to breed a very territorial, eccentric, like list of human beings who are going to do something because that's just who they are. I consider myself to be more adaptable than most, but when it comes to like using AI in my writing, I just don't, it still doesn't work for me yet, but it works great for Ben. And I will go into Chat GPT, like our corporate account, and I will watch it because I want to see how he uses it because I'm fascinated by it. And he's also teaching me something, whether he realizes it or not, because I want to see like his process. And one day I'll probably get more into it than I currently am, other than just kind of empowering those around me to use it. But right now I don't really use it that much, at least for my own creative
Outside
process.
of just the language, how we put words to paper, you said it's, especially with AI, how do you know that the facts are accurate? Especially in the future. I actually look at the present and say your job of trying to figure out what facts are true from either the restaurant brands or even worse, the technology firms. This is an industry with a lot of noise, a lot of marketing, and not always substance. How do you figure out what's true today when you're looking at the industry?
It's sort of dependent on the situation. But here's the truth though. Like, if you're talking to the CEO of X burger brand and he says, "Hey, Danny, like, I'm going to open 500 locations in the next 6 years." And, you're like, are you? So like, there isn't really a way to fact check that other than coming back to it. And you have to some degree, take some of these people at their word. But as a journalist, like, we just have to make sure that it's clear. And this is a nuance that people do not pick up on social media in particular. And I will sometimes have to tell them, but and we used to actually have a disclaimer, but we don't have that currently. But where it's like, I didn't say this. Like, if the CEO of whatever wants to lie to me about something they're doing, like, but here's the only way. So if I find out, like, say that, and this has happened more than once. If I do an interview like that and I write that and I find out he lied to me or she lied to me, and I find that out through somebody I trust or whatever, if I read it or whatever way I found out that he was not telling me the truth, then we're not going to talk again. But
or it'll be a very difficult conversation.
Yeah. So we have trust that goes both ways. If you want to lie in your interviews, that's kind of up to you. But when it comes to like facts and finding, yeah, we're coming out with our QSR 50 here in August, which we've been doing for almost 3 decades now, which is the top 50 brands by system-wide sales. And the process of getting that information is very painstaking. We're the only ones, to my knowledge, who do that without a third-party data company helping us. And, times I'm jealous of that. Don't get me wrong. I want to just go, hey, X data insight said this, right? But that's actually being sourced one-to-one brand to us through a submission process over the course of about 3 months. And so again, like, if chicken brand wants to make up their AUV, like, that's on them, because that's going to go to people who are going to see that. And so I don't think that they do 95% of the time. But yeah, then the other thing is, like, obviously we have, if you're a public company, we could search for your filings and all. So there are ways to get like legitimate information like that, but a lot of it is,
in
the
truth-telling economy, that is ground truth and is the most valuable asset you can provide.
Yeah, right. So again, going to the start of this conversation, the biggest thing that we do all year is the QSR 50. It is how our web traffic was built. Honestly, it's how our entire brand was built back in 1997. And so the only reason that people consume that is because we're who we are and we distribute it through a platform, but they believe it because it comes from us. So that's where it becomes really valuable. And that's how you beat AI to an extent, because again, we're having this conversation, above level of like competing with them as a search. So if you do research like that took 3 months, then they're going to cite us now. So we got to get them you're like jockeying for truth, and the QSR 50 is a great example of that. And so is the drive-through study that we've been doing since, for the last 25 years. And we have a few different reports that we do that are pretty painstaking, but, best franchise deals is the one we're working on right now. It comes out in November or September. We use an entire council to figure that out. And it's a pain. Like, we take the submissions and there's a lot of them and you got to sit there and sort them and all these things. But again,
but it puts you in a really interesting place where you've built a lot of relationships and had a lot of these conversations, in addition to writing articles in your podcast and interviews in the magazine. What are you hearing about the industry as a whole? As a restaurant industry, where are we today?
Yeah, loaded question. I'll kind of take you into my thoughts from my Chicago interviews. I was just putting these down on paper last week. So I asked everyone 3 questions. I asked them what their thoughts on the state of the consumer and tariffs were. It was kind of like one combo question at that time. Tariffs were, that was like last year's version of AI. In terms of like what was on the floor at the Chicago show.
And 2 years ago's version of blockchain.
Right. The second question was on how do you define value? And then the third question was, give me a tech trend that you think is a myth, and then give me one that you think is not a myth. And so I'll tell you, so what I kind of, and this is how I piece like the state of the industry from, like what were the answers to these 3 questions. And so the first one, the state of the consumer was pretty widespread in that, Chipotle had told me this about a month ago, that his take on this was that the consumer is on the sideline and the consumer confidence levels are down to numbers that we haven't seen since the pandemic. But the reason for this is unique, as it always is, to the current climate. And we're talking about tariffs. And so tariffs for most brands are not really affecting them operationally. Their packaging is kind of the thing, but like in terms of costs of goods, like it's more theoretically concerning than it is any legitimate thing at the moment. Even somebody like Chipotle and avocados, like they have sourcing that's varied enough where it's really not that big of a deal. I mean, these things may come to be a big deal, but they're not yet. But what it is doing is it's causing some consumer confidence issues following, 3 years of inflation and price hikes. And now somebody's sitting there going, wow, I wonder what my car is going to cost in 4 months. And so they're buying some large things, like they're pulling them forward into the calendar. I read this in Bloomberg the other day. There's like some consumer spending that's like of bigger items. And what they're doing in turn is then they're not spending on restaurants and they're not spending on travel. Travel in particular, I think a lot of the airlines said this right away. It was like it just fell off a cliff when the tariff announcement was made. But again, it's like, it's not all about the tariffs. There are a lot of things macro-wise that are happening that are causing consumers to just be a little more wary. And so what we're seeing in the industry is that the frequency is down, the traffic and the guest counts are down. They already were down. But nobody is really taking price anymore because this is mostly a QSR conversation. It had hit a little bit of a ceiling. And so now that they're no longer taking price, but the guest counts continue to go down, they're not making up that revenue on the top line. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of these comparative sales in the last couple of quarters. You throw in one little thing like weather, and suddenly now that delicate balance on the top line has been struck, and you see Chipotle have their first negative quarter since the pandemic. And again, it's against a pretty high quarter last time, but that is what I think you're seeing, generally speaking, is I think you're seeing people still spend money when they go to restaurants, but they're just going less frequently. And so
traffic's down, which pulling revenues down. You're no longer taking price. So where's that leave restaurants? What's the solution? Just make less money?
Well, so the restaurant industry is no stranger to low frequency. If you think, and it's been an over leveraged industry since I've been covering it. And you were a franchisee, right? If my memory serves. So one of the things that makes this sector unique is that the cost and the barrier to entry to get into it is less than most things. It's still high, don't get me wrong, especially if you want to buy like a Taco Bell, it's like $2 million. But compared to like opening a hotel or some like other, business you want to get in, like you can open an Auntie Anne's for like $400,000, right? So we have long had too much volume in this space in terms of like unit count. I mean, we were having this conversation before the pandemic. I remember this guy told me that we were in a zero.
Overbuilt.
Right. Yeah. He made this like really dramatic statement to me. He's like, we're in a zero sum game, Danny. And I'm like, what are we talking about? But the idea being like that every restaurant that opens, one closes, and there were bankruptcies happening all over the place. And, COVID kind of like sent some that were hanging off the rail off the side. And then, but what ended up happening, so at first there was a rationalization there and we're like, okay, well, like the strong survive, whatever. But that's not what happened, because what happened is that when the first couple months, everybody was like, okay, I don't know what the hell's coming. I'm Shake Shack. I'm going to take this X $100 million worth on my revolver and I'm just going to hoard cash. And this is what the publicly traded QSRs did. And what ended up happening is the recovery was a lot quicker for a lot of them. Shake Shack, slower than some based on their kind of dine-in footprint in New York City and all that. But point being, they were suddenly like, you had all these large chain restaurants that were flush with cash, and the people that ended up actually getting rationalized out were the independents. And they weren't necessarily, that wasn't what the consumer was asking for.
It's just they were the best restaurants. It was the most well-capitalized restaurants.
Exactly. So they were not built to have capital to survive being closed in 2 months. And then the worst part, or the least talked about part, in my opinion, wasn't being closed. It was reopening and closing and reopening. That killed a lot of independent restaurants.
Why?
Well, it's very expensive. I remember talking to this guy who had, this woman who had, I think it was an Italian restaurant. The inventory alone to do that and to bring her staffing back every single time was really difficult. And it ended up just being a line of sight that she was like, I'm just giving up. And so I think what came out of this was huge chain growth. I mean, Starbucks in the last 3 years, even with all the things that we write about them and the craziness, has opened like 1,500 locations. They opened 500, if my memory serves me, like 569 or 500 something locations last year. They were the most of any chain in America, them and Jersey Mike's and, these brands, they're all getting bigger. They got bigger because they were able to take these second gen sites. They were able to jump into spots that were, left behind by some of the less capitalized brands, in QSR and the drive-through and all these things. And so, we ended up back in the zero sum game, pretty quickly. And so, not having traffic is kind of part of how this industry works. But what I think the future is, and you talked about like, how do you make money? So the upside of everything that's happened is this is now an omni-channel universe, right? So you can now make money in 5 different ways. Your interior of your restaurant is 3 different restaurants. You got the kiosks in the front, you got the back, you got the line, you got the window out the door for the drive-through. You have the transaction center in the parking lot with the pickup lanes, or people buzzing, whatever hospitality door you might have, whatever it is that you're doing, right? And then you also have the couriers and all these things in delivery. So it's really an agile business now. I think the opportunity is there. I think to a level, like if you look at someone like First Watch, it keeps talking about this every quarter. Some of these macro challenges are hopefully transitory. And so if you can maintain your service and your hospitality, which now is so important given some of the transactional things in this industry, and you can just kind of keep that value proposition and you can survive for a couple of years, take the negative traffic, take the tepid sales, that there will come a point here. And I've been kind of wondering this. It's like, what if we sit there one day? I mean, right now, gas prices are coming down. What if we sit there and go, you know what? That wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Does everyone suddenly go back out to dinner? I don't know the answer. It's just a theoretical concept of like, do we have pent up?
I don't think it's that theoretical. The pendulum swings one way. Eventually, the pendulum's going to swing back another way. I mean, in some ways, it goes back to your zero-sum game. If we can wait it out, the herd will thin. And when the pendulum swings back, we'll be in a great position.
Agree. Yeah, that's what I hear all the time. And the herd is thinning in the middle. I think that's one of the kind of byproducts of COVID is that, you know, we were kind of left with very defined customer experiences, both digitally and in store. It's pretty difficult to be neither of those things anymore. You know, if you're kind of like just sitting there in this cloudy area and your brand is like not really well defined and differentiated. Like if you look at Texas Roadhouse, a really good example of this, right? It's like how are they doing so well and so long and so consistent? You know,
I'll tell you why. Me and my daughters, when my wife was out of town, put on cowboy hats and cowboy boots and drove my truck to Texas Roadhouse and waited in line for 45 minutes because it was an experience.
Right. So the experience economy for restaurants is alive and well. You know, I think if you look at the brands who are kind of doing well these days, they usually have a differentiated brand purpose and they have their ordering figured out, whether it's at the queue or it's digital. You know, if you're...
We'll go into that because I think that's interesting. You know, you talk about the business behind the business and not just covering the food, right? Texas Roadhouse, it's easy to cover the experience. It's easy to cover the great steak. You know, that's why we go. That's one of the reasons that you cite them kind of winning right now. But is it that, or is that, you know, I look at the technology coming out of COVID and seeing the ones that had embraced technology ahead of time being able to offer third party and, you know, pick up and all of these kind of things. How much of it is the infrastructure, the behind the scenes business of it versus the experiential part?
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, we'll stay on them as an example. So Texas Roadhouse, and I'll also throw First Watch into this. You know, you kind of look around the full service sector in particular, and a lot of the technology kind of felt like just throwing darts because we were just like, well, I heard about this. We need this. Put this in there. You know, those two brands do not operate that way at all. So Texas Roadhouse and First Watch were two things that they went and got. They got KDS systems. And you're like, ooh, sexy, right? Like I got digital, you know, ticket chits in the back or whatever. But
hey, I'll say this. I was in Japan recently and we walked in after fumbling around, not being able to order anywhere for a couple days. And there was a kiosk and you hit English. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can order what I want, not just what I can point to. This is amazing.
Yeah.
First time I actually got pro kiosk.
Yeah. Well, so that's the thing is the brands who did this correctly were investing not just in building a tech stack and going and like piecing together everything that they could find. It was, and like, okay, so Q and Jen Kern, she always talks about this and like this idea that removing friction is the most overrated statement in the restaurant industry, that friction is actually part of the experience. And so I fully agree. I mean, especially in full service dining, if it's frictionless, I don't feel like I got any hospitality. So there was definitely an overcorrection. But again, the brands who did this well, Texas Roadhouse. So what do? They KDS. They don't do delivery. It doesn't work for them. You know, and then they also have like, they worked on their wait list system, right? There's like these little wins, right? And then they worked on like some inventory with the labor side. And First Watch also changed this model a little bit so you can check out. So they have this thing like they put the ticket down like halfway through the meal, you know, saying you pay it right now. And it used to be where you had to pick it up and then go to the cashier. And that was one of their early principles of hospitality, was they wanted you to come back, another touch point. But they realized through this process, like it was bottlenecking things. But more importantly, like people didn't really want to go wait in line and do that again. So they invested in that technology. Texas Roadhouse has pay at the table technology, I think, with Ziosk, right? They call Roadie Pay or something. But again, it's like the right technology investments, you know, and trying to understand sometimes that maybe you do have to get off the boat if you invested in the wrong thing. You know, don't just keep going forward if it's not working for you. If you look at the people who are winning, their technology is always to enable and empower the things that you have already seen. So your point about let's go, dress up like cowboys and go to Texas Roadhouse and wait 45 minutes. From Texas Roadhouse's perspective, like they want technology to maybe make it 45 minutes and not an hour and a half.
4:45 on a Sunday, and it was still 45 minutes.
Yeah, and they don't want people to get mad. I mean, Red Lobster's, that tablet that they put on their table years ago just did not work because it cheapened the experience. It made kids not talk to their parents. It didn't really work. It was like you were paying into playing all these games and stuff. And like, it was an expensive full service experience where it was like, I felt like, that made it seem like I shouldn't pay as much. And so you have to be very careful. You mentioned kiosks, but so that's a whole nother conversation, but that's a perfect example of what you're saying though, because here's someone at the Chicago show. Here's how we talked about it. He's saying, we're never going to book kiosks, at least, not in the current state of things, because we want our employees to talk to our customers, given how much time and investment we spend in that part of our business. And my answer to him, and we talked about this, is that on the flip side of that, there are a lot of brands I'd rather talk to the screen than the people who work there.
Yeah, know your brand, know your value proposition, know why your customers come in. Jimmy John's, we were freaky fast, right? If I can speed up your service, I should be doing it.
Right, exactly. Well, and there are just some QSRs out there in the world who do not put that kind of training into their hospitality inside. It's just not who they are. It's like AI at the drive-thru, right? The voice order AI. There are certain brands who do that right now where it's like, yeah, I don't miss talking to the person.
100%.
And there are other brands out there, Chick-fil-A, Pals, some others that would ruin it for you. So
intricate part of the experience.
Yeah, it's very, very, very different by every
Holistically,
brand.
When you look at the industry, do you say that restaurants are buying too much technology in general? They are not buying technology, or they're buying the wrong technology?
Oh man, I mean, I think it's all of the above. I think I have seen brands who did everything that you just mentioned. I mean, this from your business model. I think the number one most frequent thing that happened in COVID was adding 7 different pieces of technology. And so I see this in the industry now, and like the providers, it's this kind of race to consolidate into a unified solution across a lot of fronts. But of course, the danger with that, or why some are doing that better than others, is that, you don't want to be mediocre at everything. So like sometimes it used to be like, well, I'm going to get the best, order payment system, and I'm going to get the best loyalty. And so I think there's a race right now in your space to be able to cut some of that confusion out and to do it well. And that's why a lot of partnerships are being struck by certain brands, and where you are kind of, I was just at Olo's conference a few months ago, and there are things that they've done in the acquisition side and the partnership side to kind of make that unified solution work for operators. And so I think that there are concepts, especially if you go back to like 2022, there was way, way too many technology solutions, and it was crippling both from a operational side and the training side, and then also probably from a cost side. And then it became like, okay, well, like let's optimize some of this and get rid of, some things that maybe didn't turn out to be that important. I think of curbside a lot of times now. I remember so many articles being written and submitted to me about how that was going to be never going away. And like, it's gone away at a lot of places I've been to. I see it still here and there, but for the most part, didn't end up being the solution that you need to. I had this friend in robotics, great guy, great company. They were working on a robot to do curbside. Like it would go through the door, get to your car. They don't end up needing that in the world. And, actually, and I've seen some of those robots, just in generally, like speaking, who used to come by, if you remember, and like take your order and sing happy birthday and stuff. Well, if you pay attention now, and if you went to Chicago, like What's happening a lot more often now is it's busing tables. Didn't turn out the consumers actually wanted, they didn't really want to talk to the robot. So the technology had to evolve that. Although I've seen those in hotels, and that makes a hell of a lot of sense, because nobody wants to talk to the guy coming up to the room of your hotel at like 3 a.m. So I love that as a future model. In restaurants, I just don't think it panned out to be something.
Well, it goes to
people
matching your audience, right? Like, that's a really good use case for robotic delivery. I don't want to speak to the person. I want it to just be dropped off. You know, it's late night. I'm in my underwear. This is a great place to employ technology.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Last broad question, and then I'm going to hit you with a bunch of just short ones. AI. So broad strokes, where do you see it going into the industry? Where do you see the biggest use cases? What are the CEOs of these big companies telling you behind the scenes?
Yeah, so some CEO told me the other day, the best way, he put this a lot better than I could, which is that the future or the present of AI is the way that they're applying it currently is mechanical, not human. So they're using it for inventory and stuff like that, and a lot of different things that are going on, but they don't see the like automated restaurant just yet, at least not for them. I know Sweetgreen's doing that, although, they're kind of doing it with people. So there are versions of that where it's going to make sense, but broadly speaking, they don't think that robots are going to be running restaurants anytime soon, and that AI is going to be accepted by customers as a replacement for hospitality, broadly speaking. Again, going into the applications of where I see it, I do see it in the drive-thru at brands where it works really, really well. Like you go to Taco Bell, that consumer understands that fits who they are. That's why they're scaling it really quickly. It's just not going to work for everybody. So that's kind of what I think about AI right now, is that it's being leveraged very, very effectively and very often right now in the back of the house. It's helping, the way that brands are positioning it is it's like freeing up, their employees to do things that are, going back to our conversation at the very beginning, to make you more valuable. Because if I gotta pay you, $20 an hour, which is, we're headed there, right? We're there in many places. I heard from someone the other day that they were at a leadership conference for restaurants in Chicago ahead of the show, and they were talking about $30 an hour. What's $30 an hour is the future. They're just going to have to take labor out. And so if you have fewer employees and you're paying them more money, you might as well have them talking to customers. And so if you can use AI for some of that stuff, that's happening right now, right away. There's automation happening to be more consistent. Donato's is using it to put pepperonis on pizza. No customer on earth is going to care about that. But, I think there are brands.
Whoa. For everybody out there that's got a pizza with too few pepperonis, right? They care deeply.
Well, if the robot does it correctly, if it goes 100 edge to edge, as they say at Donato's, every single time in the same exact places, then the customer is happy. That makes them better. So that's AI and automation to make them a better pizza company. But calling in to the call center and stuff, I don't know. Depends.
I certainly think that allowing the machines to manage the metrics and the people to focus on the people side of the business is better for everybody.
Yeah.
Walk me through, though, on the loyalty side, the revenue generation side, the experience side. How do you see it playing out there?
Yeah, loyalty was the funniest thing to come up, I would say, because there were people who, when I would ask that myth question, someone told me that like consumer data platforms were a myth, or at least right now they thought they were a myth. And I was like, and then someone else told me that was the biggest thing they were doing.
I would say Bicky would have some issues with that.
Well, it was just kind of revealing, because it goes to show you, and this was, there were a few people who said this, like loyalty for the sake of loyalty, which everyone did. It was like the parity in that sector right now is huge. But, like Zach at Thanks will tell you, like, you can't, not only can you not all, like, loyalty is not uniform, and the metrics that you use to measure success are not uniform. And so we always do this panel every year at our conference where it's like, what do you actually want to track? And it's not like there's one answer to it. And so what I found out at that show that I hadn't heard a lot, at least not people admitting it, was that loyalty programs did not work for a lot of people. But it's a very hard thing to divorce, because even small, like how do you get rid of it? So you have to kind of evolve it. So I think you have to understand how to build a loyalty program. I just did a podcast on this that aired last week with White Castle, and the amount of time that they spent to understand what that was going to look like for them. Go listen to how much effort they put into the structure of the program, where it wasn't just tiers. They made them quests. They did all these little things to make it so it made sense. That's the difference between just like, I need a loyalty program and I'm going to have one that actually makes my data work for me.
Well, that's the hard part. Restaurants are all so diverse. Even when it comes to something simple like loyalty, it could be deployed in a number of different ways, and they're all different. So from a technology provider, perspective, makes it really hard to build software. And I do wonder if, that's the reason we have such a, fragmented technology stack, and why we don't have that all-in-one, and whether or not AI will allow these all-in-ones to be flexible enough to get around, the nuances of each brand.
Right. It's why people like you are important. So you gotta keep. This is. I think you and I may have even talked about this, but someone one time asked me, he was a restaurant executive, new, it just started a brand, and he asked me for some advice on and I told him, I was like, okay, well, yeah, read QSR Magazine, and this was something that Ram Krupp from One Dine told me years ago. But if you really want to learn, don't treat your vendor, like a cash register, or like somebody who's not a partner of yours. If you really, because even if you're not going to get the service from X technology, set up the meetings, take the meetings, and just say to them, what solutions are you solving? Because the people who really understand the problems tend to be the vendors, because their true existence is built around having to answer, and they go through the process in a way that no executive can, or myself can't, of where you talk to X, all these brands over the course of a year, and what's troubling them, what they're having issues with, and how they might be trying to fix them. And so my advice to him was, go have partnerships and take the calls with the people who message you on LinkedIn. You don't have to buy anything, but just try to talk to vendors, because the vendors tend to be, at least in my opinion, the smartest, most underutilized source of information in our industry. And it's not just because I'm on your podcast that I'm saying this, but if you look at my podcast, I actually talk to vendors all the time. I do, conversations where talk to, I did one with Patronics the other day, where we didn't really talk about Patronics. We talked about drone delivery. And he understood that in a way that I don't. And that if I had talked to X restaurant using drone delivery, they wouldn't have told me the same story, because they would have had obviously a message to get across of here's what we're doing, here's why it's working, here's the potential, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to sit there and bash the, company they work with. So talk to your vendors. That's all I got for you.
Well, and I'll also say this, coming from the space, we constantly hear, why did you build X, Y, and Z? Why didn't you do this after the fact? All of these companies want to help our industry. They're all trying to. And the more input that you can give these companies about what it is that you want affects not only your company in the future, but the technology that's built for the industry as a whole.
Yeah. And don't lie to your restaurant journalist.
Yes. No lying to the restaurant journalist. He's got a platform. He is a top voice after all. All right. Speed round. And you actually already kind of hit a few of these.
All right.
Quick takes. Drone delivery, going to be a thing or not a thing?
I don't think it's going to be a thing for a while. And I think it's only going to be a thing for very specific markets in this country. I do not think it's going to be a widespread thing.
Who's the smartest source of truth for you on the industry? Who's the person that you look to and say, that's the oracle that knows all?
Oh, man. I don't know the answer to that question. There are so many people I like.
The default answer should always be your boss if you can't come up with one.
Well, I don't really have a boss in the restaurant media space because that's become me at this point. I don't know the answer to that question. I can't think of somebody. I mean, there's just too many people, and I don't know.
Robotic kitchens, is it something that's going to happen one piece of equipment at a time, or is it going to be a full on, like, we're going to do a build out of a robotic kitchen at once?
I think someone will do that. I think 90% of the people will do the other thing, which will be what Chipotle's doing, which is putting the automated make line into the restaurant, but having people run it. I think that's more, even Sweetgreen with the Infinite Kitchen are having people finish the bowls. So I think it'll come piecemeal for sure before it ever. Someone's going to build a robotic restaurant though. There's no way that's not going to happen.
Who is the best restaurant CEO today? And you can hedge, you can give me a few of them, but who's somebody that maybe is behind the scenes that people aren't aware of that's just slowly been, an incredible CEO?
Oh man, I admire so many of them. They really are just some of the brightest people. I'll just give you some that I talked to recently who I really thought were just, I can't even get. I mean,
you're the politician. I understand.
I told you the other day that I talked to Chipotle CEO for an hour, which we're doing a cover story here in August, and Scott Boatwright, and again, I'm not saying he is the one. I'm just highlighting him because he's kind of on my mind because we're putting together that issue. But if you want to talk to like someone who is a restaurant life operator focused person who came from that ops background and really understands restaurants. One of the funniest things about our sector, and this will answer your question the best that I can, is those who have been around a while, they kind of know this story of our RTM as a company. And RTM is like the Bill Belichick coaching tree of the restaurant industry. And people don't realize this. It's just like Paul Brown, Rob Lynch from Shake Shack, Scott Boatwright, Tom Garrett, who's at GPS Hospitality. These guys were all working together at Arby's. And it's like this little company, sitting there in the middle of the thing had turned out all these incredible, great people. Point being, like all those executives who came from there, Paul Brown, Rob Lynch, again, Scott Boatwright and Tom Garrett, they are all kind of similar in the way that they stress things like throughput and less exciting, like differentiated brand elements of how things work behind the scenes, that I just think that it's just kind of a funny tree that has developed there of this RTM squad of like executives. But again, I was just talking to him, so I brought him up. I think Scott's a brilliant guy, wonderful person to talk to and knows the business as much as anybody I've ever spoken to. But Paul Brown's that way too. So, it's not just one person, but.
And then last question for you. What is the thing that you're most interested in the restaurant space today?
Man, for many years, I always gravitate toward the kind of topics of labor and culture. I just have something about it appeals to me. I really like sorting through the kind of noise of it and seeing who I think is actually doing a great job there. And I think a lot of that comes down to kind of my own personal managerial evolution of trying to figure out how to manage people. I try to take some examples from how people run. And I'm also a know that, managing people and culture and all that's the hardest thing in the world, in any business. It's true in my business. Nothing I do is harder than managing people. And so I really gravitate toward that in restaurants because I see some examples of it, where you're like, I don't think it's great to work here probably. but then you run into brands with their they legitimately do an incredible job, and I admire it about them. And so I like writing and kind of digging through that part of the business. And so like even going back to Scott, like we talked a lot about that because he was the kind of right-hand man of Brian Nichol. You know, like Brian Nichol was the guy who handled the stock and the culture and the vision of how the brand was seen to stakeholders and to the media. And Scott Boatwright ran the company. That was what the chief operating officer did. And now all of a sudden, out of the blue, you know, he's going to Starbucks and Scott's becoming the CEO, and he's got to figure out like his management style. Because he had a certain management style as the kind of like in the trenches guy. And I've been there before. Now, how's he going to act when he's the person who's got to be like the face and all these things? And so he was only at that time that I talked to him, I think he was like 10 months into the job. So he was very candid about it and just kind of understanding like what I don't know and, you know, admitting that he was nervous about it. And also admitting he's really had to learn how to say no to people and all that. So yeah, I like the culture. I like the people part of the business, and I like understanding how you make these things work from that part and up. Yeah.
By the way, could not agree with you more on the labor front. The whole idea of, you know, merging technology and people, like that kind of comes together at labor. It's a fascinating subject. I actually had Jordan from Seven Shifts on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, he's been on my podcast.
He's a super smart guy. I interviewed him at the NRA show, and like, it's just a fascinating subject. Well, Danny, thank you very much for coming on. For everybody listening, is there any place if they want to get a hold of you, if they want to see your podcast, they want more Danny Klein, where do they get it?
Hey, look, man, first of all, thank you for having me. But if they've made it an hour and 32 minutes, they probably know where to find me. But if they don't somehow, and you've listened to an hour and 32 minutes of just me talking without having any idea, I am, as we mentioned, on LinkedIn. That's the only social media platform I'm really on at this point. But I would sort of recommend that you come to our websites and subscribe to the magazine, the e-letters. It's all free for anybody in the restaurant industry. And of course, can't get away without plugging the fact that we have a conference in September called the QSR Evolution Conference, which you should attend. And if you have any questions about it, I'm always here to answer those through LinkedIn, through email. You can find my contact information on the site. If I said it right now, you probably wouldn't be able to take it down because it's kind of weird, but I'm easy enough to find.
Well, Danny, I appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.